Good evening and a warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Children, Families and Education Select Committee. My name is Councillor Heena Makwana and I'm the chair of this committee. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. We are not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts, and when you are invited to speak, please ensure you turn your microphones on so that you can be heard in the recording. For those watching via YouTube, if you're so minded, you can complete one of our resident feedback forms. These can be found in the information section underneath the YouTube video. These forms are intended to help us improve the way that we run our meetings. Okay, before we go through our agenda, I'd like to introduce colleagues around the room. So, starting with my right, I have Councillors Smallwood and Hagger. On my left, I have Ryan Dell, Democratic Services Officer, and then Councillors Sweeting, Core and Nelson, Mr Tony Little, our co-opted member. Officers with us this evening, there's quite a few. Taz Corsa, Poppy Reddy, Abby Preston, Catherine Angelini, Julie Kelly and Kat Wyatt. So welcome to you all. Okay, moving on to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Ryan.
We have apologies from Councillor Judge with Councillor Core substituting. We have apologies from Councillor Gill with Councillor Nelson substituting, and we also have apologies from Councillor Batt.
Okay, many thanks to Councillors Core and Nelson for subbing this evening. Okay, agenda item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting, which is the 10th of October. Do we agree the minutes? Yes? Councillor Sweeting?
Once again, excellent minutes.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to Ryan. Agenda item 4, to confirm that the items of business marked as part 1 will be considered in public and the items marked as part 2 will be considered in private. We have no part 2 items. Oh, my apologies. Thank you, Ryan. Agenda item 2 was declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting. Do we have any? No. Excellent. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5 then, which is straight on to our review topics. So I'd like to thank officers for joining us this evening to gain further insight into their particular service areas and of course for providing these informative briefing notes in advance to help shape our questions. I'd also like to remind members of the committee that some of the briefing notes were marked private and confidential. They do contain sensitive data, so please be mindful when you are actually asking your questions. Okay, with that said, I am going to pass over to the Children's Court System. That is Poppy and maybe Taz. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Good evening. I'm Poppy Reddy. I am Assistant Director for Permanent and Specialist Services, and the court service falls under me. So I'm here just to talk a little bit in terms of the court process, the legal system, and how the social work teams work within that system. Firstly, I guess apologies for the incorrect date at the beginning of that, the paper. It should be 2023, not 22. And then apologies, the briefing is not very brief. It is a bit long, so we did try to get as much as possible in. I'm sure you would have read the briefing, so I'm just going to go very briefly and then open to questions thereafter. As a local authority, we have a statutory obligation in terms of safeguarding safeguarding children, to assess risk and to try to put in as much support available to support families and children. We start off the process with early intervention and then progress as the risk escalates and if services are not working the way we want it to work. I would note that legal proceedings or the court arena is the very last option that we would consider. We would explore all possibilities before we actually go into the court arena, and we will try to put in as much support as we can in order to try to prevent that, but that is the last route. We would start off, obviously, we know, with early intervention and then progress to CP, and then when we enter the legal remit, we will start with what we call the public law outline. There's pre-proceedings and care proceedings. Pre-proceedings is the work before we go into court. So in terms of the pre-proceedings, which is what I'll concentrate on initially. That is where we give families the opportunity to work with us to try to avoid that final escalation into the court arena. That allows parents to also get legal representation, so they have advice from solicitors and work with us to try to the risks that we have identified, to try to alleviate that, or to look at how else we can help manage that particular risk. That involves detailed assessments, detailed work, expectations from both the social services department as well as parents and family members. At that stage, we'd like to involve all family members, so we explore other possibilities as well, not just as alternate care, but in terms of support, because we know it takes a village to raise a child. So we will look at other support elements that can go into that particular part of the work. It's very intense driven. We might want to commission different sorts of assessments during that process. That is to inform the level of our services that go into what level it's targeted at. We might need some specialist assessments. We might need things like psychological assessments or detailed parenting assessments. Social workers are trained to offer parenting assessments aimed at families' needs. So we do PAMS assessments and Parent Assess, which is the new assessment that works and helps families where there is an element of learning needs or disabilities. So it works on a different way. It's more working with as opposed to working against and to. If that process fails, it's time limited, because obviously we don't want it dragging on, because we want some stability and certainty and permanence for children. If that doesn't work, we have a process where we will review at midway. So generally a PLO process would be around 3 months. The pre-proceedings work would be around 3 months. We will review midway to identify where the gaps and delays and what still needs to be done, and then once again at 3 months' time. If there is need for purposeful delay, then we will at that stage introduce it, but it needs to be planned and it needs to be focused. Failing which, then the final step is going into the court arena. As I said, we don't take that very lightly, because it's quite a draconian measure. Before we do that, we will have a meeting with the parents, with their solicitors, with any other representatives that they want present, in order for us to let them know what the local authority's intentions are and what their legal rights and remits are within that process. It does involve that the local authority pull together all the assessments and all this information together in a statement that will be presented to the court. We need to evidence the risk, the harm, what has been done, what support has been put in place, where the gaps are, and what difficulties we've encountered in putting the plan in place. That then gets issued with the court service, and then we start the actual care proceedings route. At that point, the local authority has to consider what's the best option to safeguard children. We will look at the no order principle in terms of the Child Care Act first and foremost, but we will need an order if to safeguard some sort of legal remit in which we can safeguard young people. We could ask for no order, or a supervision order where children remain with the family, within the family home. That is if the risk is not imminent, and there is still work to be done with the family. Or we would ask for an interim care order where we ask for children to either be cared for away from the family home. Again, we will look first and foremost at family and friends, try to keep the child within the family network, within the community network, before we explore alternate care. Generally, the guidance says care proceedings should last 26 weeks. So from the start of proceedings, from the date of issue to the time care proceedings is concluded, it should be 26 weeks. Unfortunately, given the difficulties we've encountered with COVID, etc., that timescale is not being met at the moment. We're currently sitting between 48 and 50 weeks in Hillingdon. We're still below the national average, but it's still quite significant if you think of a child's life and a child's timescale. So it is quite significant. During the proceedings, once again, there is the opportunity to consider other assessments that will inform the court to help make that final decision, and that could take the form of independent assessments, that could take the form of drug and alcohol testing. Whatever the risk is, that is where we will be looking at that and exploring how best to support. Generally, assessments are based on what recommendations come out of that and what recommendations we can put into the family to try to mitigate against some of those risks identified. In Hillingdon, we have 2 court teams. The work they do is exactly the same. It's just because of the extent of the work and the intense nature of the work that there's 2 court teams. So there's 2 team managers. We have advanced practitioners which support, guide, mentor, as well as 11 social workers and 1 permanence worker. The permanence worker is there as a support to offer those direct services to parents, whether it is some sort of group activity or individual activity, again, around boundary setting, around school attendance, doing that practical piece of work with families and parents, to the extent of even helping parents to get children to appointments, helping parents to access community resources, clubs, activities, groups. So they provide that practical. It is one of the aspects that the court likes in terms of our offer to parents. It's come highly commended quite a number of times from both guardians as well as the court itself. The primary focus then of the court is where we've gone through the process, where the child protection plan has not worked and we need to escalate, and we need the oversight of the court in order to achieve outcomes for young people. We pride ourselves in the fact that our social workers are experts in their field. We have provided training and guidance and support to allow them to do that. So we've commissioned specific trainings like the PAMS assessments, like Parent Assess, like AIMS. So social workers are now seen as experts within their own right in the court. That then minimizes the use of independent organizations, independent social workers, and it also allows the people who know the child best to be undertaking that assessment, and there's more of a relationship building within that. Within the court team, we will hold a case or work with a young person from the time that the matter comes to our notice. So it will come in via the front door and following assessments, and if it's in the court arena, it then gets allocated to a social worker within the court team. We will see the process through, so from the point of application to court up until the point of order, and then thereafter to permanence. So we will keep a young person within the team, so it helps keep consistency. They would have obviously developed a relationship with the social worker, so we keep consistency throughout. If the care plan is adoption, which we tend to go with the younger children, we will keep a case open within the court team up until that adoption order is granted. So that's quite a significant time. So if you're looking at a care proceedings lasting 50 weeks of that child's life, and then following that, it is anything between 3 to 6 months before an adoptive family can be identified, and then a minimum of 10 to 13 weeks before an application order can be made at that time. So you're looking at quite a considerable time in that little child's life. We will also, in the cases of adoption and alternate care, we try to provide the child with a narrative that they can take on with them, into their next journey, and we do that in the form of life story work. We have very strong team, and highly commended life story work. In fact, Ofsted found that one of our strengths. I could probably go on and on talking about the court system because it is so vast. But just to say that we do have very strong processes before we actually initiate the care proceedings, and in terms of gatekeeping meetings and processes. So we have to evidence that harm is significant, imminent, and there's nothing else that would be able to safeguard that young person before we actually embark into that arena.
Thank you, Poppy. I can see that you're really passionate about this too. That really comes across, so well done. Thank you. Questions? I see all these hands being raised. Okay, Councillor Sweeting.
Well, can I first say thank you very much for your detailed report. I mean, I'd like to thank all of the officers that have provided the reports that we have before us. Now, we're in the business of selecting a major review here. And by reading your report, and I've just mentioned a few sort of notes here, you've got a highly experienced team. You're delivering high quality services. We're a lead authority. Okay, all good. So it seems to me by reading this that we've got a good service here. And I think we're in the business of saying to ourselves, what can we add to this if we have a major review on it? And I think in the past sometimes, and I know it's only sometimes, we've had a major review with a service that's already good. And we come to the end and think, yes, we're saying it's a good service, and we've not added very much to that. And I'm just saying, what can we add? this team that we have here, what can we add if we have this as a major review, please?
I did have a think about this, and I would agree that we do have a very strong service, and I think the court service has developed over time to get it to where it is. But saying that, there's always room for improvement. We're always striving to be better and to achieve the best outcomes for our children. I have to say I was stumped in terms of how we can make it better. There are little bits and pieces that I think that needs work on, and one of the things that I'm quite passionate about is in terms of repeat care proceedings, where we've had involvement with with parents before, and we've had care proceedings for older children and siblings, and we still seem to be stuck in that cycle. That is something that I'm quite passionate about. It's something that I would want to take forward at some stage. Not some stage. Well, there's a business plan that I'm currently working on. So that would be one of the areas that I would like to see some improvement, because we shouldn't just be acting when the risks are present. We should be trying to work a little bit more from a preventative perspective as well, because apart from the impact on the local authority, the financial impact and everything, there is that element of the emotional impact for families, for children. Severing a child's ties from families is quite a serious matter. So that would be something that would be on my agenda.
Thank you. Do you want to follow up?
It's just that we've just completed a major review on the Stronger Families Hub. I mean, I presume that the work of the Hub also feeds in to the work you're doing. And again, we know we've just completed that major review, which ended up saying, good things about that service. So I'm just asking whether we can step back and possibly, this is up for the committee, but say, well, thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Okay, Mr. Little.
Thank you. And I'd like to repeat the thanks that Councillor Sweeting gave for the briefing notes we've had. Whatever we decide here, it's been of value to us, I think, to have had all this information from you. And in that same spirit, if I may, can you give us an idea of the scale, the sorts of numbers of cases that you deal with in a year?
In a year. I unfortunately didn't bring my stats
sure,
with
to measure.
but just briefly, if I can recall, in the last financial year, I think I chaired 158 legal planning meetings. That is where we're considering whether legal threshold is met or not, or what other support can be put in place. And I think we had there was 101 young people that went through the care proceedings route. That's children, not families. I think the families might have been about under 70 families. So that was just in the last financial year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hagar.
Thank you, Chair. Good report. It makes it much easier actually when someone speaks through it, Poppy, and you get a bit of an idea of where we're going with each and the parts to it. A couple of things. I agree with what Councillor Sweeting said as well about it. It's very in-depth and we've got quite a lot there. One thing though that I picked up on was the challenges, so thank you so much. I love it when people put the challenges in because I think it's really important. And going forward with that, I can see you've got a lot of work going on there, and I'm just conscious of that part, and I don't want to miss that. So I think what really I'm saying is there's quite a few challenges coming up. We're looking, you've already spoken about the court delays. That's a massive challenge. I can see there's a costing to the council, of course, on that as well. I picked up that you've got an extensive project on placement sufficiency as well coming through. Criminal exploitation, recruitment. So there's quite a bit there that we're actually working on as well. And I think I just wanted to make that noted. And also actually how we stand in the future and what that looks like. So my question really is, how are we looking with this in the future? And that could be part of what we're doing as well. And do we see it increasing? Do we see it decreasing? How are we with the rest of London? How is that looking like? Those sorts of questions. Is that okay, Chair?
I think in terms of the rest of London, I think in terms of the cases that we bring before court and the feedback that I've received from court as well as the recent Ofsted inspection is we take matters to court at the right time and the right cases are brought before the court, which means that our pre-proceedings work is really strong. So we try to avoid the escalation into the court arena, which is what I think is the basis of our work. So in terms of how we compare to other local authorities, we probably don't issue as much as other local authorities if you look at the population demographics and things, so we probably don't issue, but the ones that we issue on are the ones that need to be before the court arena.
Any other questions or comments on this? Oh, Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd just like to echo what Councillor Sweeting said, that for me, this strikes me as the report is very comprehensive, but it's incredibly broad, and if we're going to do a major review, we're going to have to hone that down. I could potentially see something about honing it down to do something around the challenges, but actually a lot of those are completely out of our control, right? And I just have a concern that they're so out of our control, like we're just going to end up trying to solve problems that aren't ours. And I mean, this is a great committee, but I'm not entirely sure that we're going to be able to, solve the court system, encourage loads of people to foster young people, solve exploitation all around this committee table as much as I'd love to solve all of those issues. So I guess my concern is this is a very comprehensive report. You're obviously doing a brilliant job. The bit we are doing is going really well. I'm just not so sure what value it will add for us to just go round in a circle that we actually can't square.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smallwood. I think I agree with your comments there too. It feels like we would just be doing a review for the sake of it in this area, because it's a very strong service. Poppy, you're doing really well, your team's doing really well. So is it really necessary for us to do a review at this stage? Perhaps we can kind of get an update on how you're getting on at some point, if that's okay. But yeah, maybe it's something that we need to probably just park for now, I would say. Yes, Councillor Kaur.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Poppy. It was very useful to read all of this, especially as a sub, something new comes up and it just excites me. There's so much is happening under my nose and I'm not aware of. It's just amazing what your team is doing. In terms of, as everyone agrees, that probably not a major review, but if there's anything that you think as a council we can do to support you in terms of, do you need help with capacity building or something where you struggle, then let us know. Thank you.
I'm not going to say no to capacity, am I? Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, go on quickly.
Apologies, Chair. I'm just leading on from Councillor Kaur's point. If there is a specific external stakeholder or group of people, whether it be courts or support with that we could get in, we could have it as a single topic where we could call in those stakeholders and question them as to the performance of whatever they, maybe I don't know which one of the challenges it will be. I mean, Poppy will be far more knowledgeable than we will, but there is an option open to us, so we don't completely close the book on this one.
Can I just add, a lot of those challenges are not just Hillingdon challenges, they're national challenges. So yeah, that's where the difficulty arises.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate that, Poppy. Okay, so you're welcome to stay. I'm going to move on to Kat is next. But before I ask you, Kat, to provide an update on your briefing, I'd just like to congratulate the Youth Justice Service, who've been recognised for providing a quality service to children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. I think that we in Hillingdon, are we one of four local authorities in the country to be awarded the Youth Justice Send Quality Lead status with a Child First commendation, which is a fantastic achievement. So I just want to acknowledge that and then say congratulations on behalf of the committee. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Makwana, and a bit of a hard act to follow, but I will give it a go. So I've been asked to come and talk to the committee regarding a number of themes for major topic review, particularly with the youth justice lens. So I've broken those down into the 3 points that were given to me. The first of those is around prevention and early intervention, what programmes are in place for at-risk young people. And there was a specific reference to county lines within that. So I think it's important before we start just to recognise that county lines is a thread of child criminal exploitation. So it's really important, I think, we think about county lines as part of the umbrella, child criminal exploitation, and particularly around modern-day slavery, in terms of how children are treated, particularly by adults, in terms of exploitation and coercion, etc. So I've made reference in my briefing largely to our Axis service. It started its journey back in 2018, very much driven on the back of a recognition, both locally and nationally, that we were seeing from a number of reviews regarding children who were hitting either statutory threshold for significant safeguarding concerns or coming to the attention of authorities for quite serious offences, and sort of catching people by surprise, really, because agencies are saying, we didn't know about this child, how has this occurred? But actually, as you start to draw that information together as part of reviews, etc., and you put the pieces of the jigsaw together, you actually realise there's quite a lot of information out there. So we recognised there was a significant gap, and actually we wanted to address that gap and say, how can we draw this information together earlier, triangulate it, and actually identify children at risk much earlier? So that's where Project Axis was born, very much pivoted on that, finding that child at that crossroads as soon as possible, and to kind of help them divert in terms of the direction they were travelling in. Axis started off as an Excel spreadsheet, started off in terms of the information that we receive through our police partners, through our schools, through our youth justice service, through our social care. Very quickly evolved and escalated in terms of the level of information that we were able to galvanise from our partners, and we recognised quite quickly that we needed a more sophisticated, comprehensive system to help us manage that information. So we were fortunate at that time to embark on a journey with the National Chief Police Officers who had some money to help us establish and build quite a comprehensive analytical software system. So we were able to draw this information together into a system that would then help us to triangulate that information and support identification of children at risk as early as possible. But also what we discovered is that the system was able to identify areas and locations and postcodes. It was able to link children's schools with where they lived, etc. So actually not only were we able to start identifying children at risk, we were actually able to identify areas and locations. And what that supported was the deployment of resources, not just as a local authority, but right the way across the partnership with our police, etc. So actually it was about the right resources, right place, right time to try and disrupt and support around disrupting child criminal exploitation. So Axis has 4 key strands, so I touched on it earlier in terms of child criminal exploitation. So that's around serious youth violence, that's around possession with intent to supply, so that's when we're talking about county lines. Obviously county lines is moving from one area to another, the distribution of drugs. It's also about sexual exploitation, and it's also about children going missing. All threads are interlinked. So although a child may be engaged in county lines activity, they will most certainly be interlinked with other activity. The project picked up such significant pace that it actually evolved into a service about 18 months ago. The service is funded through both the Mayor's Office for Policing and Public Health funding, so actually it's well supported. It has 4 full-time Axis workers and 2 network crime practitioners which manage the information, and they carry a caseload of about between 15 and 20 children at any particular time. I've just mentioned there in the end in 2020, a short Ofsted inspection described Axis as everything that everything else isn't. It's a unique service and one that we've had lots of contact from other authorities about how we deliver it. But Axis doesn't work in isolation, works very closely with other services across the early intervention prevention agenda, so in terms of stronger families, working very closely interfacing with stronger families, very much our third sector voluntary sector as well. So we have our commissioned organisation Brilliant Parents, work very closely with Brilliant Parents to deliver targeted work to parents where their children have been at risk of or involved in child criminal exploitation. And the service, alongside the Youth Justice Service, is very much involved with the Your Life You Choose programme, which is delivered across our secondary schools, and very much about educating and raising awareness for children and young people at that age. The last bit I've touched on in there in terms of our staff team is that many of our staff team have lived experience. I think that's incredibly powerful when we're working with children at risk or engaged in child criminal exploitation. So that was the first theme for discussion. The second was around diversion from the justice system. Sorry, Chair, did you want me to stop in each one or keep going?
I tell you what we do, let's pause, let's just ask questions. That gives you a chance to catch your breath as well. Anyone got any questions or comments? Wait till carry on? Okay, let's carry on then, if you're ready. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so the theme 2 was around diversion from the justice system. How often are diversionary options used instead of formal prosecution? There is a strong national and local focus around diverting children and young people from the youth justice system. And in Hillingdon, we very much predicate that on collaboration and partnership working. So we're fortunate in Hillingdon to have a whole suite of early intervention prevention options for our children coming into contact with the youth justice system, and I'll briefly talk you through those just to give you a bit of an overview of those. So most recently we've received funding for what we call the Turnaround Programme. So Turnaround Programme is a programme that's funded through the Ministry of Justice. It's funded to every local authority up and down the country, and it is about recognising children who they're not at the point of charge, but they may be receiving bail, or they might be released under investigation by the police, or they might have received what we call an NFA, and no further action. And it's an opportunity to identify those children early, to actually work in a multi-agency collaboration, and offer a voluntary intervention to that child and that family so they avert them away from the criminal justice system. So in Hillingdon, the way we've responded to that is we've set up a multi-agency panel where we meet on a monthly basis, and we can review anywhere between 30 and 70 children, depending on how many have come into contact with the justice system during that time. And the partnership come together to draw together that information around what do we know about this child and this family. Do we feel there's an opportunity to engage with them and divert them away? And seek to offer them a voluntary intervention. Then we have our Engage programme. So Engage is very, very new. Engage is funded by the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime. It's been rolled out across London, and we're the last area of London to receive the funding. We took the decision as a local authority to take the lead for the West area. So actually Hillingdon will be the lead authority for Hillingdon, Hounslow and Ealing. Project Engage is very much about bridging the gap between police custody and the community. So it's about those teachable moments. It's about providing a youth work style model of engagement to children at a critical time. It's about building that rapport and that trust, and actually continuing to work with that child back into the community. So when they're released on bail, under investigation, etc., and bridging that support into services, etc., so that actually they're not lost between that transition from custody. So really exciting times regarding Engage. So we've just recruited an Engage coordinator. I'm in the process of recruiting 2 Engage workers, and they will work across the 2 custody suites, so Polar Park and Acton Town. But they will work with children across 3 boroughs as well to bridge them across. Again, a voluntary intervention, but it's about the right service at the right time to those children. Then we move on to our out-of-court disposals. So out-of-court disposals is a framework for out-of-court disposals. So if a child comes into contact with the criminal justice system for a relatively low-level offence, the police, in conjunction with the Youth Justice Service, can consider whether or not to divert them to consider an out-of-court disposal. We've taken the position in Hillingdon that when a child is diverted for an out-of-court disposal to be considered, we will undertake a comprehensive assessment with that child, because we feel that we need to make an informed decision about what's the right outcome for that child and what's the right interventions. So every child that comes into contact with us, we will undertake an assessment with that child and that family to understand what the needs are for that child. We then have a multi-agency decision-making panel with our colleagues from the police, from our targeted youth support services, from Stronger Families, where we'll talk about the case, the child, we'll talk about the nature of the offence, the factors relating to that offence, and what is the most proportionate outcome for that child. And there's 3 options that can be considered there. One is what we call a triage, which is technically it's a voluntary intervention. Most of our children engage. It's up between 4 and 6 weeks. It's very much about hand-holding those children, recognising that the offence has been committed, but supporting a child to access services to support their ongoing needs. So often we would use triage, for example, with a child who's come to notice, for example, cannabis. So they've been caught with some cannabis. So it's about recognising that an offence has been committed, understanding the harm that's been caused as a result of an offence, but very much focused on signposting into Sorted, for example, to provide ongoing support around substance misuse needs and anything else that's going on for that child. The second option is a youth caution. So youth caution usually starts around 3 months. Youth caution is administered by a uniformed police officer, and there will be a set of agreed interventions that that child will be expected to engage with as part of that intervention. Should the child not engage with that intervention, there is no substantial recourse, so they can't be taken back and charged, etc. But I don't think we've had a scenario where that hasn't happened, so we kind of actively engage with that child to ensure they complete that. And all the time the Youth Justice Officer is in correspondence with other partnership agencies in terms of school, targeted services, etc., and with the family. And the final one is a youth conditional caution, so very similar to a caution, but a conditional caution means that if a child doesn't engage with those conditions, then the matter can be referred back to the police and subsequently charged and taken to court for the offence. It kind of moves me on to my next point, really, around the next theme around restorative justice, but threaded through everything that we do with a child that comes into the criminal justice system is about understanding the harm that's been caused and recognising how they can repair that harm. And no offence is a victimless offence, because ultimately, if a child's come in contact with the criminal justice system, there's cost to the taxpayer there, resources taken away from other things, etc. So we very much take a focus on restorative justice in everything that we do. Every child that comes into contact with the criminal justice system through any of our out-of-court disposals or subsequent statutory orders, we have a dedicated restorative justice team who will work to reach out to the victims, engage with the victims, etc., to gather their views, and actually we do some really powerful informed work with our children. So segueing me nicely onto the last theme in terms of restorative justice. So restorative justice is a component work that we've said that we undertake with all children who come into the youth justice system, and actually it's the vision of the youth justice service that we take a justice for all approach. So that really is about ensuring that there's justice for the victims, for our communities, with regards to that, and we ensure that we pursue the voice of the victim is threaded through. So we've had great success over the years about a number of victim conferences, which are incredibly powerful. They take a lot of time to get there, but actually to sit a young person in a room with a victim and then being able to express their views. And actually in the last 3 or 4 months we've had another 2 face-to-face victim conferences, and just the power both for the child but also for the victim in terms of that harm. Restorative justice for us that extends beyond youth justice, and colleagues in the room will be aware around the reducing the criminalisation of children who are looked after, and actually that protocol. And actually we've taken some work recently to work with our residential care homes and about upskilling the knowledge and skills of our staff working in our residential care homes about how to deploy and use restorative justice skills and techniques to diffuse situations, avoid the police needing to be called, etc., and to resolve challenges within our care homes. Similarly, with our foster carers, we've delivered training to our foster carers around the restorative justice techniques as well, and across the professional network as well, that we've done that. And subsequently, because my fantastic restorative justice team aren't busy enough, they've also been out and about with our schools, and in terms of working with our schools and delivering training directly to our schools around the use of restorative justice techniques, and trying to divert children coming into contact with the criminal justice system through kind of understanding in terms of their behaviour, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, I feel like, what should we do? What should we look at? It's such a fantastic service. It sounds like it's all working really effectively. But, okay, questions? Councillor Sweeting.
Well, yet again, thank you very much for the detailed report and for your enthusiasm and the explanation that you've provided for us. But again, I would say that it seems, from what you've said, that it's all working in the right way. I'm not suggesting that there are other areas that could be improved or things that we could look at, but I think as a major review, what could we bring to you that you're not already doing, because you seem to be on track with all of the strands of the service that you provide. So how can we add to that, please?
I'm not sure there's anything to add. I think what I would acknowledge is that actually we're very fortunate here to have a strong partnership network, and that actually the engagement of our partners in terms of delivering these services. We don't do it in isolation. We couldn't do it in isolation. And actually, I think that's a real strength for Hillingdon as to why I'm able to sit here today and share that news with you. So I can't identify a particular area, Councillor Sweeting, where I could see that benefit.
All I would say is it seems to be a good service, you know, and what we don't want to do, I would suggest, is to reinvent the wheel when you're already invented it.
Mr. Little, I'll come to you in a minute.
Thank you, and thank you again for your enthusiasm for the work. I had 2 questions, if I may. One perhaps relates to Councillor Sweeting's, and how do you think we do relative to our neighbours? And the other is completely different, and that is, obviously, this doesn't always work out, and sometimes the children involved do end up getting sentenced. What happens afterwards?
Thank you, Mr. Little. In terms of how do we do compared to our neighbours, picking up some of the key areas. So in terms of our response to children at risk of criminal exploitation, we're seen as a exemplary good practice area. I think that was recognised through the when we were awarded the National Municipal Journal Award, but also we have a lot of other local authorities that seek our input in terms of developing their response to child criminal exploitation. With regards to our diversion from the youth justice system, the youth justice service has 3 key performance indicators, national performance indicators. and one of those is around first-time entrants coming into contact with the youth justice system. And historically, and we still continue in Hillingdon to have one of the lowest in London and one of the lowest national rates of children coming into contact with the criminal justice system. So whatever we're doing seems to be working in terms of diverting children away at the earliest opportunity to stop them coming into contact with the criminal justice system. In terms of restorative justice, we had colleagues from the Youth Justice Board who attended our Youth Justice Strategic Management Board just a few months ago, where we actually had a presentation on restorative justice, and they were overwhelmed in terms of how well we're delivering restorative justice, and they said it's one of the best examples they've seen across London, so it was highly commended.
Yeah, well done. Sounds amazing. Thank you. Councillor Hagger.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations, and great to have you today to hear about it all. It really is first-hand, and it's been brilliant. And just say, I don't really think it needs to go for a major review either, but it was worth having you here to hear all about it. And again, when someone speaks through it, just makes so much more sense. And I'm really pleased to see that we're a lead too, and that we're working so well on our multi-agency work. It's a real recommendation for other authorities too. But congratulations, and thank you for preparing all that and for coming here and talking about it. Thank you.
Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. What a brilliant, passionate woman you are about this. This is not my committee, but I'm so fascinated by what's come out from the 2 reports so far, because I didn't understand any of it. Never been involved in any of it. Just a question to you in regards, you said you go to schools, you go into schools. How is when you do the presentation, what is the reaction and the deterrent to stop children getting involved in that, or those children who are drawn into criminality by others, exploitation, as you mentioned, and also their own peers? What's the response to that?
The work we do through the Your Life You Choose programme is obviously alongside our colleagues in the police, for example, as well. So that's when we're working with children and trying to start the conversation about child criminal exploitation, because I think often it's about starting that conversation and providing a safe space to have those conversations. Obviously, there's lots of follow-up with those children afterwards through their PHSE lessons, etc., and about where they can seek further support and guidance. And actually, as a result of some of the work that we've done in this school, we've had further contact from the schools around referrals into Axis, for example, and about supporting that way. But I think it's really important that we don't shy away from those conversations, and that's what Your Life You Choose does. It provides that opportunity to have those conversations in a space, and for children to ask questions which they may ordinarily go home and try and Google on the internet and not actually get accurate information on. So they've got people there with lived experience, with that professional knowledge that they can ask those questions to, and explore those. And often the children come up afterwards as well and want to ask questions of people as well.
Councillor Smallwood.
Chair, I hate to sound like I'm on repeat, but I think, again, this is not for a major review, but potentially for some individual topics, whether it be the restorative justice and the work of the youth board and hearing from them, or Strand 1 and the early intervention, some of the programmes the council's providing to have more information and to sort of ask some questions to whether it be the people that are experiencing that or delivering it, I think would be amazing to bring to this committee. But I echo what other colleagues have said.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this one? Nope. Great. We will move on to Abby. Thank you.
Thank you. I will keep mine relatively brief because mine are quite specific, I guess, in the queries that came up. So you have the briefing notes. The first point is around communication with schools, particularly in light of the academisation agenda. Where we are at the moment, we have around 99 schools. Roughly half of those are academies. And that does create a lot of opportunities working with schools, as well as some challenges as far as working together closely as a system. Within Hillingdon, we have 12 multi-academy trusts. And the picture as far as maintained in academy schools seems to have stayed fairly stable recently. And a lot of the majority of the schools that are academies are the secondary sector. where we only have 2 of our schools that are maintained versus the rest that are academies. So we have various areas where we look to engage with our head teachers, and we run things like an annual head teachers conference where we try to have key areas of strategic development that we can talk across with our schools that would like to develop as an area. The council has linked meetings with the primary and the secondary sectors, and that's obviously a mix between maintained and academy schools. Pardon me. We also have head teachers termly. We do a weekly briefing that we send out to all of our schools and governors and keep updates in there, reminders of deadlines, etc. And our LEAP platform. And one of the key things that's really supported us working with our schools recently is the development of the Hillingdon Learning Partnership. And that's something we're really proud of because we have a real mix of maintained schools and academies. And it's a really good vehicle to look at areas of need across the borough and look at what schools want and make sure we're filling those gaps that are generally areas that would be outside of what our school improvement team would be able to develop. And it's a model of schools leading schools with support from the council, which I think is really positive. So we're in our 2nd year of that work, and it seems to be growing and developing and a really positive partnership model. So that's helping us drive everything forward. Now, we have various other teams, obviously, that work with our schools closely, and we're trying to sort of bring that all together and make sure we're working with our schools to co-produce the direction of travel moving forward. You know, there are a lot of challenges in the system as far as SEND, which we'll talk about in depth, I'm sure, shortly. And it's about working with our schools, listening to where there's challenges and seeing how we can shape what we do to support them, whilst also making sure we're holding a level of challenge for those schools. Obviously, our school improvement support is for maintained schools, but there is an element where we offer some of that support to academies as well, in line with talking with the DFE and helping to triangulate evidence and support that development as well. And most importantly, it's to make sure that the children in our borough are getting the best deal. So whilst the focus is obviously on the maintained, there are elements where we support with academies as well. So I think as far as communications with schools and relationships, it's going to be an ongoing developing area, and we are, certainly the service is doing all we can to make sure we continue to strengthen those relationships, but we're very open to sort of more ideas and looking at more ways to do that.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I do think this is a potentially very interesting topic for major review. I don't think it would be unfair to say that there is a mixture of engagement from schools with the level of input they want with the local authority, but I'm sure if something went wrong, they'd soon come banging on our door faster than you can say a secondary school. So I do think that's interesting, but I also think it'd be interesting to see, is there a difference between academies and maintained schools and in the levels of engagement on various topics, but also have other local authorities found ways of engaging those that maybe we have struggled. And actually, I'm not actually necessarily laying the blame of the struggling with the communication with the local authority. It's not a blame game, but it may be that it's the school not engaging. Why is it some schools that are almost exactly that, you know, let's just say if we had 2 academy trusts, why is one academy trust massively engaged, why is one not? Now, leadership, different teams, blah, blah, but is there something that we can get them to think? I think this could be a really interesting, relatively broad way of how can we get more schools to engage, share good practice. Are we the ones that need to act as the catalyst and the middleman? I think it could be incredibly interesting, and we've already heard that there is a mixed level of engagement, but I think digging down into that would be really interesting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you very much for the report. I think it hit me between the eyes, some of the statistics, and I know we're not going into the details of that. But, you know, the fact is that it must be of a concern to us all that there's a significant tranche of our schools that are not engaging in any way. And I do think the history of this goes back really to the time when we had grant-maintained schools, when we lost all but 2 of our secondaries to that. And I don't think we've ever, you know, regained maybe the trust. That's a difficult word to use. I don't really mean it in a negative way, but we've never really stepped up since then to engage. And I agree that this is a subject for some deep discussion, but I'm wondering whether that discussion could take place by way of a part 2, so that we can, share our concerns and we can come up with some of our views on this. Yes, I think that it would be good as a major review at some stage, but you've been battling with this issue for years and years, and we've not pierced through. So us coming as a committee to this and thinking that we've got a magic bullet here, I don't think is going to be easy. I do think that we might need to step back and just maybe have as a part 2, 1 or 2 head teachers or those in positions of responsibility in our schools to say where we're, what do we need to do for them to engage with us. I mean, we have real difficulty in getting any schools to engage with us as part of our previous major review. And I know I'm a governor of 2 schools, and I know the difficulties that they've got each way with engagement and the authority engaging with them. But I do think that we need a bit more meat on this bone to actually dig deep. The paper is brilliant, but it does hit you between the eyes. It really does. But I would suggest that this needs to be revisited on another occasion.
Okay, all right, noted. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's very disappointing to look at this really and read about it, because this is our children, and the accountability of the schools in regards to how our children's lives is moving on. It really is dismal here. I'm looking at some of the examples on the engagement here. We've got 31 heads attended and 51 did not respond.
Nelson, I did say that at the start that it's a private and confidential briefing note, so,
so
can we not go
I'll
into the
take
figures? Thank you.
But for me, I think it's important that we look at this as part of the review, and also in regards to what's coming out, because here you've got some of the maintained schools not responding, and some of our academies is disengaged. So we really do, I think there should be a priority more than anything else, and I don't sit on this committee, but just looking at this, there should be a priority of this being on a major review.
Sure.
That's my views on it.
Thank you. Your comments have been noted. Mr. Little.
Thank you. Whenever we're presented, I think, with a set of figures and like this, that we put 2 and 2 together, whether we get 4 or not is a different question. And I guess I've got, in relation to this, two questions. One is whether I am drawing the right conclusions 2 and 2 wise. That is it more of a problem with the MATs than with the single academies? And the second one, speaking also as a governor, but an authority school, head teachers are very busy people, and I guess whenever they're approached by something like this, the question that's uppermost in their mind is what's in it for them, and they've got plenty of demands on their service and their time. So it would be, do we think we have room to be offering them something that would increase their engagement? And is it a case then of communication, i.e. we're not communicating well enough, or is it maybe the product, the advantage to the schools isn't big enough?
Thank you. I think it's a really interesting picture, and I accept your point around 2+2, and I think it adds up to 4 and 5 and 6, would be my answer, in that there is a real mixed landscape there. We have, you're right, a range of sort of multi-academy trusts and some single academy trusts, and I think that creates different dynamics. I think we have more levels of independence with our schools working, and it's not just with the local authority, it's working with each other, working in, you know, different ways collaboratively. I think we have quite a lot of independence in our schools. An element of that when it comes to the local authority, I'd say, is that we don't offer the level of traded services that other local authorities offer. So sometimes that can be an element where you are more involved in supporting schools and have greater intelligence and sort of ability to kind of help them to improve outside of the statutory duties. But I don't think it's all negative. I think there's lots of real positive developments as far as the relationships. I think as far as the academies, one thing we've started to do is work with the CEOs and have meetings with the CEOs. And I'd say we have good engagement with our MAT CEOs across the borough. Now, it might be that they may not turn up to borough-wide events in the same level that we might wish to, but they certainly engage in lots of other ways. And the examples that we've put in the briefing note are just a few top-level sort of borough-wide statistics. But when you look at the engagement with individual teams and reaching out for support and helping in lots of different ways to work collaboratively, I think there's a lot more sort of rich data there. But that's not to say there isn't room for improvement and more that we'd want to do. Now that we're working as more of a sort of one council approach under one directorate, I think that's going to really make a difference as well. I think part of the challenge historically may have been that the services within education were more segregated, and now we're coming together with much more of a stronger shared vision, which that will hopefully translate to our schools, and they will be getting the same messaging, whoever they talk to, and the same sort of willingness to support. So I think a lot has changed over the years in lots of different ways. And the other thing I'd say is in relation to your point is around it is really hard being a head teacher today. There's a lot of really, really big challenges, and the pressures on their time are huge. And you're right, in order for them to attend meetings, it has to be something really beneficial. And a lot of the times we might be talking about things that those schools don't feel that they've got an area of improvement needed or anything that those meetings can offer. So I think, hence my answer as far as 4, 5 and 6, I think it's a whole mixed bag as far as where we are. But certainly there's a lot more work we want to do, and that we know that we can achieve more if we work together more. So that's certainly in our interest as far as the different education services.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kaur. Ms Little, do you mind switching off your mic, please?
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this presentation again. And I want to echo what Councillor Sweeting said, because all these trusts are so different and each has their own kind of level of engagement with ourselves, which would then mean that we wouldn't be able to do justice unless it's a part two thing. Then we talk about individual needs and then get the right perspective around it. And the other thing was, coming to the question was, how do you think this committee what can this committee bring to help with that engagement? What can we as individual ward councillors can do to bring? And you also mentioned that probably we are not offering the training services to the academies or something that attracts them. If not, why do you think that is? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's a cultural position. So we just haven't offered those services for a very long time, and therefore schools and academies make their own arrangements. So I think that's something that we're always continually open to, because I think we'd want to have a really flexible offer and make sure that what we do offer meets the needs of schools. And I think we're doing a lot of work, like I said, across the services around our sort of approach and making sure we pull together an education strategy, which is one of our next steps. And I think at that point will be a prime time to then find out, well, what do schools need from us? How can we develop the offer and make sure that the strategy meets the needs and that we're capturing all those voices? there is and will continue to be a lot of work around that. But I think as a committee, it could be interesting to find out a little bit more about schools' perspectives, if there are clear differences between types of schools, whether it be maintained academy, primary, secondary, north, south, and understanding how we can shape our offer further to support schools.
Okay, it certainly sounds interesting and a possibility. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Councillor Haga.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I mean, what I'm gaining from this is that you're in the middle, actually, of looking at what you're going to do to make it better. So that's what I'm hearing. So there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline. There's a lot of stuff that you've looked at that you're about to implement and that you're bringing it together. So with that, I don't think it would warrant a major review. I think it would definitely warrant a review, but because there's things actually happening and going on at this time, I don't think we could really review it. So I think it's definitely something to come up. And I can hear from what you're saying, you know, you are looking at ways to actually integrate all the schools together. It is a bit of a golden bullet. We're never going to get them all in. And they're all complex and they're all diverse and they all have different areas and needs. But you're working at that to deliver that. So I think it's a bit later. I can see there's some work going on.
Mr. Little.
One of the challenges that the borough has is coping with provision for children with special needs, as we're going to hear later in the agenda. But is this an area which is particularly challenging in relation to our contacts between the schools and the authority, or is it just hugger-mugger with a whole range of other issues? Is this one that's particularly difficult when we're talking to the schools?
Thank you. I think we probably have some more challenge than some other local authorities may do, but that may stem more from the culture that I referenced. You know, the way we've set up our services is quite different, so it's very difficult to compare like for like. And as I sort of touched on earlier, the individual levels of contact between teams and schools and the support and the networks, I think are generally positive. When we talk about the communications with schools needing to improve, I'd say it's more on a sort of high-level strategic aspect where we'd want to collaboratively come together, use expertise, hear voices, make sure that we're moving in the right direction to plug the gaps of the majority of our schools together. I'd say it's more around that collective approach rather than it is individual schools, although there's always going to be challenges of different natures, particularly when we're referring to SEND. It's a very emotive topic, and we don't necessarily always have all the answers that we would like, i.e. enough, funding and so on. So I hope that makes sense. I think it's a mixed bag. I think we do have it more challenging, but I think it's contextual to some extent.
Okay, any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Abby, do you want to go on to the next item?
Yes.
Please. Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you. So this is to do with number of children arriving in the country, staying in hotels and accessing education. So we've included some statistics there for you to see the numbers as they've changed throughout the last couple of years. So children from abroad at the moment we're looking at around, or children residing in hotels, primary children 17 and secondary 11. So those numbers have dropped significantly compared to the number of children out of school in Hillingdon being more around the total of 173. So the Asylum Seeker Project commenced in March 2020, and the admissions team have been aware of around 1,500 families with children seeking education across 7 different hotels, predominantly in the south of the borough. Many of those families transitioned to temporary housing, and that scheme sort of came to an end, but we have had since where are we? So, as I've referenced at the start, we've had a number of families, 28 since September, that still arrived. So we're working hard to make sure that those educational placements are there for those children, but it can be challenging because of their access to transport and how they get to schools and the locality and so on, as well as obviously their ability to have access to things like uniforms and the resources that they need. There's also challenges then if they move, because children aren't able to be removed from role until a new setting is found, and that can cause some challenges within the school system. But we do have our interim provision that's available to support our children who are awaiting a school place for any reason, and we do have an educational pathway that includes ESOL support that's funded and eligible for children that are in Year 11. So I think there's been a huge decrease, obviously, in those numbers, and lots of those families are residing in temporary accommodation, either within the area or may have moved out. But in the most part, those children have had an educational placement found for them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you. And this was a topic that I suggested, so I'm definitely very passionate about it. And actually, I don't think when we discussed this in the last meeting that the question was, is there any placement issues? I think it's around the types of placements, the time they're in the placements, the experience they get, even things like where some schools may be at capacity and there may be a capacity challenge. That probably means that a group of young people have gone together. So potentially, whilst English might be the second language, there may be a peer that they can engage with. You know, but there may be the odd pupil, as I think we saw through some of the statistics, I'm sorry I don't remember them to hand, who may have gone off to, let's say, Northwood on their own, not Northwood School, but Northwood or Ruislip or the north of the borough, and the experience that somebody who's on their own without their peers, English as a second language, is getting it as an experience. I think the other thing to recognise is this is probably unique to Hillingdon singularly as an authority. I don't know if any of our in the sheer scale of the amount of young people that we've got in hotels. I was wondering whether some of the ports are maybe where boats are crossing directly and young people are coming in, there may be in some of those local authorities in the south of England there potentially, but I think the sheer scale we probably, I don't know, I would hazard an educated guess that we are one of the largest with one of the biggest challenges. So as a review topic, this is unique, it's current, and I actually think could have a positive, if we could come up with some positive, have a positive impact on young people's lives who may be going through quite a interesting and traumatic, changing experience, and it could be incredibly valuable.
Okay, thank you. Julie, did you want to come in?
I was coming in to agree that it's not totally unique, but we have particular pressures in Hillingdon, particularly in the London context. I know that Hounslow have recently experienced an increase in similar, and that's because of mainly the hotels, big hotels, airport, not people coming in because we're a port, but that in terms of the contingency hotels. From my point of view, from a review, it would be quite broad, because it isn't just about school places, is it? It's, you're talking about quality of life. I've read in the minutes that the committee were speaking around, well, how can you learn, live, thrive in that environment? And there's work that goes across all of my services and other people's services, because there are also just adults here without children, similar circumstances. So we have colleagues in education. We have, I know, Catherine T, and she can speak for herself, but I know the work and additional resources around children missing education as a result that has gone in there to ensure ourselves that they are safe. There have been issues that might sound simple, but as simple as a nutritious lunch, and DFE requirements are in opposition to Home Office expectations and the links that the Council have had with colleagues across and with different departments in government to try and resolve. I think it'd be hard to really narrow it. I know CAT Service has provided a lot of support for young people as well in ensuring that our summer activities or targeted programmes also include that group of young people, because we know in terms of vulnerability and additional needs. So there is a lot of meat in there. My only word of caution is it might take you more than a year if you wanted to look at it all, and maybe would have to narrow it down.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Julie. Councillor Smallwood, do you want to come back?
Please, thank you. Just 2 points. One, I think potentially with officer support, we could look at narrowing this down. Obviously, you are the experts, I am not, and I will always take your guidance on it. But whether it could be something around the experience of the young people once they are placed in the schools and their experience in the setting or something like that, I don't know. My other concern is just slightly more broad, Chair, that if we say this one's too broad, we are about to head on the final one to the broadest one of the lot. And I'm just worried that we're talking ourselves out of 5 review topics here, and we'll end up at the end of it going all 5 are either too broad or they're too focused on something that necessarily is out of the council's control. So I just wanted to raise that as a point, because I am just slightly concerned that the next one is the broadest of the lot.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Well, as a governor of two of the schools that have been impacted most, and at one stage one of the schools had 40 children that were not actually in the school, but they had them down on their roll. I think things have rolled on from there. I mean, these figures are very interesting because they bring up another issue, and that is the number of particularly secondary age children that are not in school. Now, we know that our primary capacity is not a problem anymore. We've got a lot of schools that are actually reducing their standard numbers. With secondary, it's a different look, totally. And what comes very, very strongly here is 114 secondary age children from abroad that currently have got no secondary place. And I know from some of the conversations I've had with particularly through the Doorway Advice Centre at Bell Farm, is that some of these secondary age youngsters, it's so very difficult to get them into a secondary school. And I think that's something that we need to possibly look at as an information item. So I think, I understand that, yes, these youngsters that have come from abroad, there's all of the support that's needed, etc., etc. But I think we've got a bigger issue here. And the bigger issue is the elephant in the room that we're just about to discuss next, which is absenteeism. And the fact is that you've got MPs of both hues, including a Conservative MP, saying if we are not careful, we are creating an Oliver Twist generation. And I think, yes, this issue that we have here on this paper is something that dovetails into the bigger issue of absenteeism. And I think that it is a national issue. We're talking about ghost children. And I do think if we're going to go for a major review, yes, it's going to be challenging. Yes, I realise that we might only come so far. But I think that is the challenge rather than this one, because I think the airport hotels, we are told that they will no longer be taking asylum-seeking youngsters. So I won't say the bus has already left the depot here, but I do think it has left quite a few of the bus stops.
Okay, Councillor Sweeting, I'm going to
wrap up. So I would suggest that goes within the absenteeism.
Councillor Core.
Thank you, Chair. I think the missing children bit can be accommodated with the absenteeism thing, but if we were to narrow this down to something which was more practical, instead of, because we don't know, because the children are moving in and out of schools, so recording their experiences might not be as practical. But how is that impacting the schools? Could be looked at, because schools are there, the teachers are there, their experiences are probably because they've been through. So that might, how they are impacted by children arriving in the country could be more doable in terms of practicalities of it, rather than the children's experiences, because they keep moving and they've been moved in and out of the borough as well. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Little.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed some of the presentation. Could you update us a little bit on where we are with the hotels aspect of it, and also on our ability to just keep track of the people concerned? We have responsibilities for them, but it may be totally impractical for us to exercise those responsibilities if we can't know where they are, because they are being moved around by forces out of theirs and our control.
Thank you. So my understanding is there's only a small number of families that are still in the hotels, but there definitely are challenges in tracking some of those children when they're moved on and understanding where they are, if they're still within our borough, and the safeguarding measures and so on. So that definitely is a challenge, but I'm sure my colleagues will add more.
So it has been a developing piece of work over the last couple of years, really. So what we've had to do is really develop our links with our colleagues in Border Force as well as in the Home Office. So often these children and young people and their families can be moved in very swift circumstances. Sometimes the schools are not made aware from one day to the next whether or not the child will come into school, because they'll be moved very quickly to another local authority. So what we've done is really strengthen that link with the Home Office to help us to understand where have they gone. There isn't an expectation that schools do spend 10 days trying to locate the child, so they will make phone calls to the parents' mobiles or whatever it might be, the contact details that they have. Once they've exhausted all reasonable measures, they make a referral to us as part of the Children Missing Education team through the Stronger Families Hub, and we would start our tracking, and that now includes a standard Home Office check if we think they've been moved by the Home Office, and then we can also do a further check with our colleagues in Border Force to see if they might have left the country as well.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this one? Okay, thank you, Abby. I think that we've got lots there to consider before we make a final decision. Right, moving on, last but not least, Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. So I've been asked to come and talk about the already stated large issue of absenteeism and attendance in our statutory school-aged children in Hillingdon. So I'll just give you some of the high-level points from the briefing paper that I gave you. I think we've already said, and we all acknowledge, that absenteeism across the country is a huge issue and has been since the pandemic. What we have seen in nearly every category of absenteeism and attendance is a doubling in the figures, which we know is a concern, and it's recognised by the DfE and others widely. I've included in the paper for you some very admittedly basic stats, just to give you a picture of Hillingdon, and that's not for any reason other than I don't have anything else to give you because they're not published. I can't compare to statistical neighbours yet, that's not available, but I have been able to show you that actually, broadly speaking, last year Hillingdon performed similar to national, and this year, although we're still very early on in the academic year, it's an improving picture, and again it's in line with what we're seeing nationally, so roughly 93-94% attendance. And see, persistent absenteeism is starting to come down, and when we talk about persistent absenteeism, that's referring to children with 90% or less of attendance, and to put that into context, over an academic year that's roughly missing one day a fortnight of school, which is quite significant. So what the government have done is as of September of this year, they've released new guidance working together to improve school attendance, so it is part of the national agenda, and we've been doing lots of work in Hillingdon to really get on board with that programme. Although it's only come into being as of September, we spent the whole of the last academic year preparing not only ourselves but our schools for the changes and trying to get everybody on board. So the paper highlights for you some of the things that we've done and some of the things that we're looking to do. We've rebranded what was previously our participation team to now become attendance support, to bring that in line with the DfE's expectations. We offer our attendance support now to every single setting in the borough, and that includes independent settings, which is a first for us. Previously, you may or may not be aware, we had a traded offer, so schools could choose whether or not they bought into our service. Now we have to provide a core programme as a standard offer, which includes a termly meeting at least with our attendance officer, the school's attendance officer, and also somebody senior in the school. So we've developed a whole new programme of what those meetings will look like, where we will drill down into persistent absenteeism as well as severe absenteeism. Once we start to build more of a data picture, we'll be able to identify, are there particular cohorts of children within that maybe we need to really focus on, whether it's children with SEND, children on free school meals, is there a high population of Gypsy Roma traveller children in that school that maybe we need to do a piece of work with. So it's still, I would say, in the implementation phase, but we do have plans for what that's going to look like. In the paper, I've tried to highlight for you that what we're looking to do by January is have a 3-year strategy for attendance and absenteeism across the borough, because this is not going to be solved overnight. This is a big problem, and it's everybody's business, to use the DFE's tagline. We need to get all of our stakeholders as well as internal services on board, because my team can't do it all, unfortunately, as much as we wish that we could. So we have lots of things that are coming up, particularly from January onwards. We're waiting to see really what this first term of the new guidance has really done for our schools. We've had to hand back a significant amount of work to them, and we've spent a lot of time training them in how to do it, and we're supporting them all the way, but it is early days, admittedly. So the data that we've got is limited. I can't give you any cohorts of children, any trends in particular. That will have to come further down the line. But hopefully you can see from the paper, we know where we need to go. It's just about how do we get there.
Thank you, Catherine. Definitely a hot topic at the minute. I wanted to ask, what does severely absent mean?
So that's under 50%.
Okay, and another question I have is, what about those children who are residents of Hillingdon but attend schools out of Borough? Do we monitor their attendance?
No, we don't monitor their attendance, so they would come under the school attendance wherever their school is.
Sure. Okay, great. Miss Little.
Since I'm first, I'll ask what should be Jan's question, which is, what could we add to this process?
At this stage, I think it is a difficult question, just because we are, I would say, still very much, I wouldn't say in the baby stages, but we're in the toddler stages of what we're trying to do with this piece of work. I think we have plans in place. Until we've done some more of that work, it's really hard to identify specifically where the challenges are going to be until we know how successful the schools have been at implementing the new guidance, what the data is telling us. It's quite a tricky question, I'm afraid, Mr. Little, sorry.
Okay, Councillor Hager.
Thank you. I found this, it is a big project, and I mean, I actually think it should be included in a major review myself. I know it's a big project, we've got to start somewhere. Just 2 questions actually that really surprised me. The persistent absence is quite high, and that's what would call for me a major review. It's higher than the national average. And then when we come down a bit further, this is all on page 2, we've got 17.3 as well, and that's early on in the year that we're starting, so I can see there's an issue there. So I'd be concerned with that. The question I've got is as well, which we're not showing on here, and I don't know whether it's part of this, but how many children have actually been taken off roll as well, so in the year. So although we've got persistent absences and we've got registered attendance, how many children have actually been taken off roll in that year? And the other question is as well is about, of course we've heard it's a national issue, but what are the other boroughs doing? Have they got a strategy in place? How are they tackling this? And what are we looking at? You know, is it something we can all work together on? Is it, or those sort of things? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the first question about essentially deletions from or off-rolling from schools. So we do track that as part of the attendance support team. Schools are required to tell us about a deletion from their roll on the day that they do it. So they submit that to us via an online form. So we do track that. As of last week, I believe we were at somewhere between 600 and 700 since the start of the academic year. But all of those have a known destination. So I think it's important to differentiate between those children and then the children that become missing education. If the school have submitted a form for a deletion from roll, they have to provide us from a set category of reasons as to where the child has gone. So usually it's they've moved to another borough, or they've moved to another school, possibly even within Hillingdon. They will select that reason. They won't submit that form if they don't know where the child is. So they're two quite separate issues. So I thought that was quite important just to highlight. And then your second question about what other local authorities are doing. Everybody's in a similar boat to us because it's new guidance. So what every local authority has been offered is an attendance advisor from the DFE who has been going out to all of the local authorities across the country. We actually have our meeting with her on Monday next week, and she's able to bring intelligence from some of the other local authorities that she's working with. So again, we're in the early stages, but I'm hoping after Monday that will help to inform that 3-year strategy that we're looking to bring in.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Yes, it won't come as any surprise that this is my favoured topic. It's a challenging one. It's been picked up by central government as an issue of concern, by the media. You're hearing ghost children being mentioned, and various organisations are saying ghost children will become ghost teenagers, will become ghost young people, and we all know where that is going to lead. And they're basically people are saying that it's going to be something that we will need to consider as a country, what will happen to these children. It's interesting as well because another select committee is dealing with mental health, and of course some of these ghost children will be linked up to the pandemic and the impact of mental health. And we have in the past thought about linking a major review with another select committee, and this may well be able to be dovetailed in. We recognise it's early days, but I think, the first bite of the cherry really needs to be made to see where we are with this and how we can improve, because we may well be able to bring in young people as our witnesses, families as our witnesses, other authorities as our witnesses, and we're all in a learning curve here. Thank you.
Okay, I do have another question, and I just wonder that if the attendance officers at schools are interacting and engaging with the attendance officers here in the local authority, do you find that they are working together?
Yes, yeah, they do work really, really well. So even under our traded offer previously, a significant number of our schools already did so because they really value the service. So we do have very strong relationships with the attendance support officers in the schools, but I would say also the senior leads have been really supportive of the work that we're doing. One of the things that we've offered them is a self-evaluation framework that they can choose to engage with if they want to really drill down into attendance in their school, what their attendance policy is, what their attitude towards trauma-responsive practice is, and those sorts of things. Our officers are encouraging everybody to engage with that this term, and the take-up's already been great, so we're hoping to use the findings of that to then inform practice in individual settings and possibly even clusters of settings moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that we're consistent in our arguments as a committee. I'm just a little bit concerned that the arguments we use to almost say no to the communications with schools, we are now using those exact same arguments in reverse, where the work isn't quite done, which we've heard from the officer. We've got almost the exact same officers, but we are literally saying, for this one it's absolutely fine, and for the one with communication with schools it wasn't. So whilst I have nothing against you having this as our major review topic, I just think consistency is really, really important, that as a committee we're doing that, otherwise officers are going to get very confused very quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Smallwood. Comments have been noted. I don't think we've made a final decision just yet, but yeah, it's been noted. Thank you. Councillor Kaur.
Thank you, Chair. And I think when the officer said that, say particularly at this point where attendance support officers are talking to each other, probably that could be a starting point or basis or way to start this major review on, because absenteeism, as you said, it is a major concern. So probably that could be the anchor to start off the review and then take forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Well, just trying to answer in some way Councillor Smallwood's points. If you look at the report, it says that this is going to be moved out by having more links with schools. Terminally hold terminally targeted support meetings with all schools, etc. So this would lead on to hopefully better communications with schools, because this is what central government is telling us as a local authority to do. We as authority are doing this, and then hopefully that will link up more and more with our schools, because they don't want to see ghost children. They don't want to see children from their own school not coming into school for various reasons, be it mental health. So this may well improve our communications with our schools as well.
Yep, quite possibly. Thank you. Councillor Hagger.
Yes, just one point actually, as I'm looking at this a little bit more in depth, about actually what the persistent absences are as well. I think we're just assuming, obviously, they're mental health, but there could be a lot of other things. There could be disability, there could be, loads of different stuff. And I think, for me, I'd like to look into what that is, what that is. What is the persistent absence? Is it disability? Is it sickness? There could be loads of different reasons.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Follow on from Becky, that's very important too as well. But what is causing it really at home? We don't know what's causing it, and there's nothing in the paperwork here to say what's causing it. So it's important that that remit is looked at widely.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments before we wrap this up? Thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. I think it's been really, really insightful to hear from all of the different services that you're providing, the strength of the services, the teamwork, the collaborative working. Excellent, really, really good. So I hope those of you who've come and we've said, no, actually it's not worth a review, you don't feel disheartened, because actually you've provided us with some really useful information and insight. So thank you all. Julie.
Could I just ask the committee if they would consider, having listened to the conversation tonight, whether maybe some more, not maybe everybody so much round the table, but short bites of the work that is going on, because, what I've heard from members round the table is actually it's valuable to see and not know. I think somebody said what's going on under your nose, and just because it's going all right, you might still just want to see that rather than the review. So maybe that's something that I can link in with Ryan and the chair.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is always worthwhile. It's good for the committee for us to understand what's going on behind the scenes, because we don't really have access to that knowledge all the time. So it's really, really good and worthwhile. So thank you. Any other comments or questions? No, you are free to leave if you'd like to. Abby, you're with us for a while, I'm afraid. Julia, you'll be staying as well? Catherine, you're staying? Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so agenda item 6 is the SEND strategy. Just to begin, before I pass it over to you, Abby, I just want to say that I think it's a really comprehensive, well-structured document. I particularly liked the how to achieve each ambition section plus
Sorry, Chair, on the point of order.
Oh, sorry.
As no other way of interrupting. How are we actually going to decide on review?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to take it offline. Councillor Sweeting and myself, in conjunction with Ryan, will be discussing kind of because we've had this insight and this discussion, we're going to take it offline and then we'll make a final decision and come back to committee. Okay? Yeah. So, sorry. How to achieve each ambition and what success looks like. I thought that was really, really quite effective, so thank you. But I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies, it's such a big document. I understand it's a lot of paper to kind of read through. This strategy is a really, really important strategy for us. As we've touched on already, SEND is a very important area for our schools, our family, our children and our teams in the local authority and health partners. It's really important that we get this right as much as we possibly can. As I'm sure you're aware, there was a previous version of the strategy which I believe this committee has reviewed about a year or so ago, and that strategy went out to residents and schools and feedback was sought. When I arrived back in Hillingdon in June, July time, I picked that up and looked at the feedback and felt it was really important that we did something with that feedback, and it wasn't not suggesting it would have been, but that it wasn't a tokenistic approach, that we really listened to some of those voices. The other thing that we've done is really do quite a deep dive into our data and really make sure that we're understanding what our position is now, where our strengths and weaknesses are, and what we need to do to improve our SEND provision as a local area moving forward. And I really must stress it's a local area approach. It's not a council strategy as such that the council's leading on. It's our strategy around how as a local area we respond to SEM. So we've used a lot of that data along with the feedback and also making sure we're bringing in the new SEND and AP improvement plan, which is really important, and the way that nationally we are planning to move forward in line with the DFE to improve outcomes for children with SEND. So what we've tried to do as part of this is capture that data, some of the key data towards the beginning, looking at our statistics compared to national, so that we have a sort of baseline benchmarking, using information from our JSNA, looking at our spread of SEND support and EHCPs and those trends over the years, and really drill down to where do we need to close the gap. So this led to, originally the 3 priorities that were in place in the version that I came into were to ensure children and young people with SEND have access to appropriate and proportionate services early on in their life, and where additional needs are emerging. The second one was to ensure there were sufficient school places in Hillingdon for children with SEND, and the third one was looking at transition to adulthood. When I looked at this with other partners in the area, I think we felt quite strongly that they needed to be broader and that we are really trying to be ambitious, and that's why we've called these ambitions rather than priorities. They are ambitions that we're going to do everything we can to try and achieve, and make sure that as part of that we're really listening to the voices of our young people that this is all centred around, as well as families and professionals in the whole area. But for me, the children's voice is really important. We've been doing a bit of work over the last few weeks trying to capture the voice of our children around this strategy and how they felt this worked for them based on what they felt their needs were. And we had really positive feedback, and we've talked to a whole range of different ages, and listening to their voices have been so valuable in hearing some of their experiences and where the system's worked really well for them and where it hasn't. And they really brought up a lot about early intervention and the need for, in their view, schools to sort of vary the type of support they provide to meet their needs, rather than the children sort of fitting into what the school has to offer, if that makes sense. But they were really supportive, all the different year groups, of the strategy and what we're trying to achieve. We've taken this back to our SEND Executive Partnership Board, which is a governance group that we have together to monitor oversight of our local area SEND response, and that involves partners from health and social care, education, parent carers, voluntary organisation, and we've had really positive feedback. And where we've sought feedback throughout this from our schools and our families and so on, we've tried to make sure that we update and shape this to meet that feedback where possible. Now, the one area of challenge that we have had a bit more challenge with is from our schools, and you'll see that in some of the feedback that I've provided. Now, we had lots of really positive comments and comments of support, but we also had comments that seemed to refer more importantly to the national sort of direction of travel around increasing levels of inclusion. Schools manage lots of different needs, and there's a lot of pressure for them to adapt and make sure they're meeting everyone's needs. So I can fully empathise with some of those challenges, but this is something that we need to do for our children and make sure that our children do live in an inclusive borough and can access inclusive schools, and that we do all we can to shape our support around those needs. And that's something I think is an area we don't want to really negotiate on. I think that's really important, that children are in the heart of everything. However, I also understand the pressures on schools, and I don't underestimate that, coming from a school background myself. So I think it's really important for us to respond to those comments and look at the support we can provide, and collaboration around how we can meet those needs, working together and using outreach models and different experts within the system to support that. So I think that's the sort of key summary. I can talk about this strategy all day long, and our services have a huge passion for SEN. It's really challenging circumstances. You know, there's never enough funding in the system, and we always want to do more. But I think for us, just to summarise, there's 5 key ambitions, and those ambitions, let me just make sure, because there's so many pages to go through, I'll just make sure I get to the summary. Those ambitions around early intervention, which is common with the first version of the strategy, which is really important, and we need to try and do more to meet need earlier. One of the things that came through the feedback from the children was that they don't feel they should need an EHCP in order to get the support they need, and they're really keen to make sure there's more support available. They did also make a comment, one of the young people around, not all children want a teaching assistant supporting them, which I thought was a really important point to also remember amongst all this. The second ambition is around fully inclusive education for all. We've then got an ambition, which obviously we had in the old one, and it's really important we continue, is provision meets the needs of our children, and that's looking at a spectrum of provision. It's not just special school places. It's about that graduated sort of response where we've got mainstream schools, we've got SRPs, we've got designated units, and then we've got special schools, and it's that spectrum which has really been developed recently, and I think it will be a really positive response. We also heard from children recently. Julie and I were just in a group session about the strategy before this meeting, and they really supported SRPs and felt that that was a really positive way forward, where children could be with their peers but still have the specialist sort of support and move away to sort of quieter spaces to learn and help them with distractions. Our fourth ambition, one of the very important ones, I guess they all are equally, but is that children live happy and fulfilled lives where they're valued and included in their community. Now this refers to a number of areas. This is looking at the outcomes outside of just education. It's about where are we hoping these young people end up, what skills and support can we give them to go into the world of work and employment and so on. It's also that they can take part in their community. It's typically quite difficult for families with children, particularly with complex SEN needs, to access clubs and be able to have their children take part in that enrichment, but also support families to have a bit of time as well whilst children can be part of those different groups. So this is quite a broad ambition where we are hoping that we can support our children to feel part of their community and feel accepted and be able to be part of that. And then finally, in line with the new SEND and AP improvement plan, we've also included Ambition 5, which is around our ambition for alternative provision. That's really key because we're hearing a lot about the needs of children with SEN and behaviour, which is really putting pressure on school systems where they're trying to make sure they can support effectively, but it can cause disruption and lead to exclusions. And this is something that's been in the media recently, is around SEND and exclusions, and we need to do all we can to make sure we avoid that. Exclusions, as we all know, can have a really long-term impact on our young people. So we're looking to have a more flexible offer around alternative provision and, like I said, in line with the new national plan, have a 3-tier model. So it's more flexible, where we're providing outreach support and in-reach support as well as AP places, but those places are not a destination. They are a sort of intervention that support our children to be able to move to the next stage. So as I said, I could talk about this for hours and hours, but this is the new strategy, so I really welcome any feedback or questions you may have.
Okay, Councillor Sweeting.
Well, actually, I've been asking for this report for some time, and in fact, the minutes of the last meeting said that we wouldn't be receiving it, and nor would the Cabinet. I mean, I quote, members asked about the SEND strategy. The report would not come back to the Select Committee and noted relatively small response in the consultation. It would be this was scheduled as a Cabinet member decision expected in October, so would not go back to Cabinet or the Select Committee.
Well,
so
lucky us to have received it.
It was interesting to sort of see it coming up. Anyway, I think the issue really is the ambitions are, they are excellent. They are ambitions. And I think the proof will be the outcomes from those ambitions. And you've talked about the schools. There's no doubt about it that schools are concerned about SEND. I mean, it comes back loud and clear from reading the report. And I think there are three issues: finance, suitability of placements, and also percentages that certain schools have got. I mean, the report mentions that. That means some schools have got significant numbers of children with education, health and care plans. Others have got none. And there's no sort of equality here. And I think some schools are, I won't say overwhelmed, because our schools manage and our schools are working very hard. But my concern is that we've got to really make certain that we take our schools with us and that we monitor this and we keep a very close eye, and I would suggest it needs to come back to us as a committee at regular intervals, just to see whether those ambitions, very worthy ambitions, are actually being delivered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I fully agree with you. SEND, as I said, it's a very challenging area where there's a lot of need and funding is challenging, and the system as a whole is not an easy one. So we're going to strive to aim high and achieve everything we possibly can with this. Now, as far as monitoring, we have our SEND governance model, and currently we have 5 priority groups, which are the same ones that have been there for a while. What we plan to do once this strategy is approved, if it's approved, is to change those groups into the ambitions. So there is a focus group around each ambition that has an action plan and that's driven forward with different partners in the system. So we plan to really scrutinise that and make sure that that moves forward. Already we're working on a lot of those actions that we've put in the strategy, so we're starting to make good initial progress with that already. I fully take your point around EHCPs and the sort of spread across the borough, and we have done a bit of analysis around that. And you'd have seen in the strategy the sort of population analysis, but the schools really vary. So we have put in there around our intention to consult with more schools with lower levels of EHCPs, because they do have the notional budgets to support children with SEND, and they're not necessarily using it all. So we are looking to do that, and that's something that came through really loud from our schools, both in the feedback, but also as I'm going around and speaking to governors and schools, there's a lot of them are voicing around this inequality in the level of sort of EHCPs. There's always going to be some variance, and there's always going to be schools that have known reputations and parents want to go there more than others. But it's really important that we have more of an even offer across the board, and that all of our schools are inclusive and all of them offer a range of different strategies and approaches to support our children. So that is something that we're working with schools and governors and different partners with, to look at how we can even that out. It is challenging, but it's a whole system response. It's also looking at parents and the choices that they make and trying to understand, well, why have you all picked those schools? Why haven't you picked these schools down the road that are very good schools that have strong provision and low numbers, so they have the capacity? So we have more work to do to understand that, but that's certainly something on our agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Hagar.
Yes, thank you. Really good report, and echo what Heena said, the Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Really good report. What I did like about it as well was what we've taken is the feedback, then put it into practice to see what we could actually achieve. I like that we were using the child as a whole. That for me was really important. So we're not just looking at the disability, we're looking at how we can manage that through different means and different avenues. That was really good. What stood out for me was one child's feedback when he said, I just don't want to be labelled as a troublemaker. And I think that's massive in what we're dealing with here. And once you're labelled with that, it really goes downward spiral. And it doesn't need to be. I thought the charts were really good, and the graphs that you put in there against percentages and the numbers were all in there. So every bit of information that we needed actually was designed in this report. So I just want to say congratulations for that. It makes it so much easier to read. So much easier to read. And reading the whole lot makes it a lot more, edifying. One of the things I did pick up I was really interested in, and it was just on page 34, And it was just, how come we have quite a high percentage in the top two brackets, which are the SEND pupils with primary needs, autistic and language. And I didn't know whether that was to do with just the general makeup of the borough, or whether it was to do with the fact that we've got HACS and we've got East Coast Autism Centre, whether that brings it up. I was just interested that the numbers were quite high compared to the rest of the others, where actually just a national average against what we are.
Thank you, and thank you for that feedback. I agree. It is an interesting trend. I mean, ASD is one of the biggest needs nationally, and it's growing and growing further and further. I wish I could answer the question as to why. I can't easily. I suspect it might be to do with possibly better access to diagnosis as well, because lots of areas have very long waiting lists. And I think I'm unpicking all that, but I think in Hillingdon we're stronger in that area than others. So I think there's a lot of undiagnosed need nationally, and that maybe we have high levels of diagnosis. But that very much is something that's coming through. I've been looking at a lot of the panel requests, the EHCP applications, etc., to understand what our need is over the last few months. And almost everyone is autism. Very, very high levels of need, of ASD. And a lot of that is coming through as being more complex need at the age of 3 and 4. So this is where we say it's really important that we focus on early intervention. And going back to Councillor Sweeting's point around funding, you're absolutely right. There is no additional funding. There's nothing we can do to generate the level of funding that we may wish to have. So what we need to do is work smarter and look at the resources that we have and look at the way we work across services. And I think us sitting in one directorate now will really support that, looking at our sort of data systems and making sure that we're all sharing information and sort of working together on that. But that as a system, we focus more of our funding towards the earlier end of sort of intervention rather than it becoming more complex later on and the gap getting bigger. So it's no small task, but we are ambitious and we hope to get there.
Thank you. Ms. Little.
A comment and 2 questions, if I may. Probably you can tell from my age, but I have a lot of experience with this council. In the bad old days when I was a councillor, the idea you put something out for consultation and then didn't alter it in the least was the norm. So congratulations on responding positively to the consultation. I'm glad to see that the culture of the council is now in that direction. My 2 questions, one's a broad one and one's a narrow one. The broad one is ambitions. I think we all love them, and hope very much you succeed. Achievement is obviously the more difficult bit, and obviously the bit that's still being worked on. And this is a 5-year plan. What are your expectations as to the timescale when you would see changes? Is it the next 12 months or much more weighted towards the end of the 5-year period? And the detailed question, if you can cope with having all of that, is we've been talking about other subjects during the year, and one of the things that struck me from an answer was the preparations for the transition into adulthood, which seems to be a problem with children in foster care or children's homes, that they just don't get the experiences that many children with ordinary families get, with things like catching buses, managing budgets for themselves, and so on and so forth. Those practical sorts of skills, are they a particular difficulty for where we're preparing children with special needs, or are they just the same as for other children?
Thank you. We'll do a bit of a joint response on the second point. So as far as impact, it really varies. There's a lot in here, as I said, that's already taken place. We're doing a lot of concentrated work currently to unpick every aspect of our SEND system from a council perspective, as well as with our sort of partners. So we're effectively leaving no stone unturned in just making sure that we are realigning any processes that need updating and how we communicate and our systems, how they work together. So there's lots of things that are happening already where we are, for example, one of the things we've got in here is around the updated banding model. So we're looking to update our matrix of funding for SEN. Our current matrix is very historic and hasn't been updated for a long time. So that project is already underway, and this will be co-produced working with schools. And we hope by the end of the summer to have that new model. So that's one really big project, actually. It takes an awful lot of sort of work and development to get to that stage, which we've already started, and we will have a conclusion to within the next year. Other areas, such as obviously school places, really difficult because that's a longer term output. However, we are continually looking at opportunities for more SRPs and designated units, and we have some opening in the next few months. So there is constant development already ongoing. Just trying to think of some other examples. As far as early intervention, we're already starting to pull together an offer around outreach as well for behaviour. And we're going to create a programme that is really clear on a kind of graduated approach to the support we offer around these different areas, and make sure schools are clear. So that, again, that's already taking place. So there's a real variation in the sort of timelines. We hope to show impact quite quickly, even with some quite big areas. But as far as sort of culture, things like increasing levels of inclusion, that's a longer term project that's not going to have sort of quick outputs. And it's about working with our schools and listening to them as to what they need to achieve that. So that will be a longer term outcome. As far as preparation for adulthood with children in foster care, Judy?
Well, it wasn't so much in foster care, but for special needs children.
Yeah, okay. It was an example. I think we absolutely acknowledge and appreciate that, depending on level of SEND and where they are, that preparation for adulthood is a greater challenge. There's greater vulnerability there. There is cross-working, which dovetails with Abby's piece of work across social care, SEND and education, and adult care services, and our post-16 offer. So there's lots of work going on, from the practical day-to-day things, independent travel, we have a programme for that, to the actual where is the destination, is it employment, is it supported employment. So that transformation work is ongoing. I think, as we mentioned today, bringing children's pretty much, we're almost there under the one umbrella, has been able to strengthen it. We heard earlier about the Youth Justice SEND work, but that's part of the SEND system. It's no CAT doing something on her own, separate to, what Abby was doing. I know when Abby was here last time, she lobbied quite strongly and got Speech Link into our school so that we can support with SALT needs. So bringing it together and working closely with our colleagues in adult social care to ensure that we've got that seamless transition is on our transformation project plan. So that work will continue alongside it and together. But lots of stuff in the post-16, we really are going to focus as well on that offer, not wait until young people tip over into adult care.
And just to follow up on that, it's really important for us looking at those stages earlier. So we're looking to prepare through appropriate annual reviews, EHCPs, ensuring the right provisions in place to make sure that we're preparing our children for those stages at an earlier point than when we should be. So it's a gradual sort of approach, so they're prepared.
Okay, great. Councillor Sweeting? You were, but...
on page, what is it? 39, I think, the SEND outcomes. Now, when we look at key stages outcomes, we look at our statistical neighbours and London boroughs. Is it possible to look at those statistical neighbours on the SEND outcomes? Because what we've seen in the past, when we look at national, it gives a distorted picture. Ofsted doesn't recognise national comparisons. They recognise statistical neighbours and London boroughs. So we don't want to be over-emphasising that we are above national when in fact comparing statistical neighbours that we're not. That was my first question. And secondly, I know that the government set up send inclusion plans, a 31 local authority pilot, and an authority near to us is Barnet, and I don't know whether we've learnt anything from the Barnet pilot. I know that this was reported in Parliament in August. This pilot, the Send Inclusion Plan pilot. So maybe we could find out a bit more about that, and why isn't Hillingdon included? Why is it Barnet and not Hillingdon?
Thank you, Councillor. As far as the outcomes, we can do the London and statistical neighbours. Really, it's a point of benchmarking, and I take your point that we tend to benchmark more against those groups, but seeing where we differentiate. And in my experience, Ofsted does tend to look at national as well in inspections, because that's their standard benchmarking across the board. However, the other areas are more contextually relevant to some extent. So I think that's reasonable. The point around the Send Inclusion Plan, I think what that's in reference to is the pilots as part of the new Send and AP Improvement Plan. So there won't be any outcomes yet. They're just putting together the sort of pilot local authorities to trial certain areas. So certainly over time we can speak to Barnet and see how that's working. But that's part of the longer term plan that should be coming into effect for all local authorities, which I think there's some really positive progress with. As far as the local authorities that they chose, I'm not entirely sure what their method of choosing was, but yes, I couldn't answer that question, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Kaur.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'm just just grateful for the passion and creativity and enthusiasm that you have for this, because it's really, really challenging. The report is very thorough and very helpful. All the ambitions are really, really worthy, and I wish you the very best of luck. I don't know how you are going to pull it off, but seeing that you've come together so well, I hope you do. The couple of things that I wanted to find out was that the parents and the teachers have mentioned the lack of capacity and lack of specialist staff. Do you think this strategy is able to address this in a realistic way? And the second question, if I may, Chair, you are supporting all of this with this ambition, all the support that you are offering. Is there any support that you as a team would need to pull this off? Thank you.
Yes, magic. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I think the school system is, as I said, really under pressure, and I think in the most part it's not so much about specialist staff, it's about the training and paying some sort of outreach model with those schools to support it. So we're going to be looking at the whole system, so we're going to be looking at the training offer that we have, making sure that staff have the right access that they need to reach that, and make sure that they're confident in teaching children with a range of different SEND needs, because those needs are growing more diverse, and we need to make sure that our education system can respond to that where possible. So there will be a lot of work around that. As far as support for our team, there's going to be lots of ongoing support for our team as well. So in making sure they're working as one council, one service across the board, and that all of our teams understand each other's work and how they can sort of plug into each other's worlds to support. We're going to put together training plans to make sure, and this is not just in the strategy, but as far as maintaining all the sort of compliance levels with the EHCPs, improving our levels of sort of annual review outcomes, making sure that all of our services are really upskilled across the board in SEND. So we're really looking at every element at the moment, but there will be an ongoing programme to make sure that they have the right support in order to achieve all this as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make an observation to start off with that I think SEND provision and what we do as a borough has always been a good news story in Hillingdon. And I just wanted to commend officers for what I think is a really good report. And I just think we shouldn't forget that actually the core of the delivery of the service has always been a good news story in Hillingdon. And I just wanted to recognise that. The two big things I wanted to ask around is ongoing feedback. This is obviously a long-term plan in regards to SEND, but obviously we're not going to wait until the end of it to review it. Well, I hope not. And last time the amount of people uptaking the review was relatively low. How are we going? I know we've asked this before, but how are we going to make sure that we encourage lots of people to give us feedback? And then around training, you can train lots of people, and then the delivery of it, then how people go and do it, it can be varied. How are we going to share good practice across our various settings and encourage the better training and the better practice to come to the forefront? Which there was talk of doing it throughout the report, and this meeting has been a nice long one, so my laptop has died, so I can't give you the exact, but there was a lot of doing that. How are we going to improve the feedback and get more of it to help enhance this, and how are we going to really eke out the good bits of training that no doubt will come from this? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. The feedback point is absolutely key, but it's about embedding that as part of the SEND culture in the same way as it is across a lot of other areas of children's services. The committee will be aware of our Child Voice Panel, our Children in Care Council. We are investing in an additional post to ensure that we capture children with SEND and they're facilitated, supported in the same way. We met with a group of young people just before we came here because we were meeting at 5:30. And using the parent-carer forum as well as all those engagement activities we're talking about in schools. And it's taking the feedback, the learning loop, and back out. And some of that's educating ourselves. It's also educating schools because young people are telling us stuff that not entirely surprising, but some of it you think, oh gosh, I never thought about that. And how we use that regularly, regular forums, young people get that opportunity, and not the same young people all the time, that we develop that pipeline of young people, and again ensure we're talking about an inclusive community, not just about schools. Schools incredibly important in the SEND agenda. So the work that CAT delivers around our youth provision, are we fully inclusive? Are our young people involved? Are those young people also having a voice in those other forums around our youth council? Where are their voice? How are we going to support that? So there will be that plan of work. There's also, again, thinking about the quality assurance and ensuring a real definitive framework that we can pull data, learning, and that's where we're going to get the sharing from. I'll go over to Abby now, who'll probably talk a bit more about the practical stuff because I'm depending on her to deliver it all.
Thank you. And we've put in the strategy around the young people's voice as well. I think that's going to be really important that we're continually hearing that and playing that back to our partners as well, because it's so much more powerful than, I was just saying, we think we need to improve something. That's going to be really important. But yes, quality assurance, making sure that our teams and our schools are kind of learning from each other. We have some really strong practice across the borough, and I think we need to make use of that and have a kind of more of a peer modelling kind of approach where schools can support schools to improve, because again, it's one of those situations where the local authority could advise, our SEND teams, SAS teams could advise, but actually hearing it on the ground from teachers dealing with it all the time, day in, day out, is a lot more powerful. So I think that's going to be really important for us, is that kind of peer support and making sure we're really recognising areas where there's outstanding practice, and we're sharing that. And we're sharing those in our kind of meetings like head teachers termly, and sharing the voice of our schools as well. So lots of plans.
I'm going to go to Mr Little because he's waiting. Thank you. Mr Little.
Thank you. This is obviously a strategic document, and I'm going to pursue a point of detail, and that is funding creates all sorts of pressures. Funding is scarce, and funding needs control of data about the individual pupils who are involved. And I get an impression from my work as a governor that there is some friction in the system between what the schools think they're managing in the way of pupils who fall into these categories and what the authority does. And I wonder what sort of confidence you have in the quality of your data and tracking of these individuals, which obviously in aggregate provide you the statistics that drive the strategy.
Thank you. I think that's a really valid point. The data is an area that we've been looking to improve continually over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. We are looking at investing in potentially other new systems that could have an integrated view of our children across the board. But data has been a challenge for us that we are working really hard to make more accurate. The other thing I'd say around funding, there is a lot of friction around funding. It's always a highly emotive area, and SEND needs keep growing and growing nationally, so there's going to be that level of pressure. We are, as I said, reviewing all the funding as it stands, looking at all of our cases, making more sense of the needs that we have in the system and where there are pressures, and making sure that we have more of a consistent approach to our funding. I think for a variety of reasons we have some level of inconsistency in the funding approach that we've had, partly to do with the tools that we've had and a variety of other areas. So that's one of the reasons we're doing the banding review, where we'll have a clear, fair, equitable system. But equally, like with anywhere, we have a fixed budget, and it's a local area budget effectively. Whilst the council minds it and manages lots of areas within it, it's to meet our needs of a local area, and that budget is a fixed budget, and it is a budget that we haven't been able to keep within over the last few years due to the level of need. So this is where, as a part of the strategy, ambition one is around early intervention. That's going to be so important, because the way that needs are going at the moment and the level of complexity, there is really strong evidence showing if there's earlier intervention, it won't lead to that level. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm not saying that we have a perfect solution to this, because it is a real challenge, and funding never is enough to meet the needs of the area. But I think there's lots we can do to be smarter with our funding. And as I said, we've got varying levels of funding across the borough, which we need to right-size and make sure it's clearer and more transparent, and that schools are clear on what that provision and resourcing to meet that provision should look like. So we have lots of work to do in it, and it will be a challenging area, but it is something we need to do. It's something a lot of local authorities are doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Last few questions and comments, and can I ask that you keep it concise, because I'm mindful of the time now, please. Councillor Sweeting.
I know that comments have been made about how we're delivering, but I think we have to recognise in the past we did not have sufficient SEND places. And also, if you look at page 38, we did not in the past deliver educational health and care plans to the statutory requirements. In fact, way back in 2019, we were only delivering sort of 22.7% in the statutory time. So I know things have moved on, but I do think we recognise that we have had challenges in the past and that we are moving on. Thank you.
Just a quick point on that one. I do agree with you, and you can see that in the statistics. It is something that a lot of local authorities have struggled with, and we've come a long way with our outcomes as far as EHCP compliance. We're in a really strong place now. Any children that aren't meeting that compliance, where we're not meeting that compliance, is children too many that we need to still continue to improve. Now, as far as special school places, it's an interesting picture. What we're seeing through our data is that, yes, on one level we don't have enough places, but actually the number of children in a specialist placement are above national in Hillingdon. And the reason for that is because we're placing more than double what national do in independent settings at a high cost. rather than in local provision. So as far as having a shortage, it's more around local specialist provision rather than it is around not having enough places for our children. And I think that's become a bit confused along the way, because it feels like there's a lot of pressure in our schools to meet a growing range of needs. But as I said, the percentage of EHCPs in specialist provision is above national. It's just that a good number of those are in independent high-cost settings rather than in local special schools. And we have a plan around that, and we'll have a lot more places coming on board soon.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to raise some concerns, because as a governor, it has been raised in the school that I'm a governor about the fundings that is not being sent to the school on time or in a timely manner for them to actually be able to fund those send children, and it become problematic for them in regards to how they're able to support those children when it's needed. So is that a problem? Because it seems to be funding is the biggest problem with send children in regards to the school and the challenges that they have to face around that, especially when they're doing their budget and a lot of schools are going through a lot of financial problem at the moment, and it's just trying to get that balance. So I'm aware that was brought to my attention. So how is that being addressed, especially those schools who have to wait so long to get the funding for the send children?
I think a number of schools experienced issues at the end of the last financial year and the beginning of this financial year. I think that probably links in with Mr Little's comment around data. We have a case management system that the configuration wasn't quite right, so the pulling through into the finance system was an issue. I was overly optimistic and thought that'll take me a couple of weeks to sort that out. We've had a whole work stream on it, and we have worked through that, and I think we've got about 5% of reconciliation to do for schools. It shouldn't be an ongoing problem, and actually the investment in further systems, and I'm not the technical person, so if you want lots of detail you might need somebody else here, but we're moving to an advanced liquid logic model of eyes, full view of the child, easier to do that, and finance are moving to an Oracle model, and now we've identified where that issue was. Some of the delays for a very small amount of schools resulted because some schools were struggling and we were aware there was an issue. There was manual payments made, so we have to do some reconciliation to see if there's anything still owed or not. But we've had a whole team literally working on it from March through to now, and we're hoping next week I'll get a nice update and they'll tell me that we're now no longer just for those few percent. So it's just acknowledge that did happen, but it's not going to be a systemic issue, and it's something that we're well aware of and been working on.
Thank you for that. Last question from me. You've been really helpful in providing all the acronyms, because often we get reports without those acronyms, and I mean Councillor Sweeting and I both from the education sector, so we understand a lot of them, but perhaps for everybody it's really useful though to have that. There is one though that I wasn't sure. So who are the Hillingdon PCF? It's under the developing post-16 options.
Thank you. That is the Hillingdon Parent Carer Forum.
Okay, thank you. Should have guessed that one. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for staying with us all this time as well to answer all our questions. Really appreciate it. Julie, thank you for joining us too. Appreciate the insight. So have a lovely evening. Thank you. Okay, so we move now to agenda item 7, which is minutes of the corporate parenting panel. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan.
Yep, so we had the corporate parenting panel was last week, which is why it was marked as to follow here, because we published the agenda before the meeting happened. And we've requested, and the Chair's agreed, that we are going to defer these to January just because they're not quite done yet. And we've sent them to officers for their updates, so it would be better to get their updates before we bring them here.
Okay, thank you very much. If we move on then to item 8, which is the forward plan, just to say that I presented our review into the Stronger Families Hub to Cabinet last week. The recommendations were agreed, so thank you and well done to everyone who participated in that. So that was great. Any other comments or questions on the forward plan? Perfect. We move straight to the work programme. Anything there? Councillor Sweeting?
A couple of things. We did talk about this engagement with our schools, whether we could have it sometime as a part 2, so that we could just discuss things that the authority may well be able to do and things that are sort of beyond our control, if you like. And the other was this in-year admissions to secondary schools. I know from information received how difficult some of these additional secondary aged families with secondary aged children are having with providing the authority providing places, not just in year 7 but in any of the statutory secondary age groups. So maybe we can have a report on how difficult it is to get these youngsters admitted.
Yeah,
thank you.
Agreed. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, great. Okay, so our next meeting then is in January. So we have, yes, exactly. We have nothing in December, so I just wish everyone a very peaceful, festive season. Take care of yourselves, and I see you again in January. Well, some of you I'll see you at full council, but yeah, take care. Thank you very much. Safe journey home.